Hey everybody, welcome to Identiverse. Hope you are enjoying all of the sessions. So good to be back at Identiverse. Definitely my favorite conference. I love attending this every year and hearing more things about identity and just hanging out with this great identity crowd that we have. So today, we're gonna do something a little bit different. We're gonna talk about kind of a topic that may be tough for some people to talk about, but I think it's worthy of a conversation that we need to have. So here's what I want you to do for this one. I want you to sit back, just take your phone, we're gonna put it down, we're gonna put it on silent mode. We're going to get out of the email inbox, right? And we're gonna have a nice conversation. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is David Lee. There's no fancy titles for this one. I'm just a human being like anybody else on this big round blue thing we call Earth. And today the conversation, we're gonna talk about diversity. But I wanted to start this first with when the thought that came in my head when I first thought about putting together this presentation. And it was this fragment of a sentence, a more perfect union. And I thought that's a perfect way to open and open this conversation and start about it. So bear with me a little bit. I want to read you something. This is a preamble from the Constitution. It states, "We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America." Now, the interesting thing about these words is that about a couple of hundred years ago, there was a group of old white men sitting in a room that decided to write these words. And they decided to write them because at the time, there was an idea, there was a spark of this idea of this country separate from the one that they had come from. America had been this country that had rebelled, and they were like, this is something that they wanted to do. They wanted to create a place where they could all feel that tranquility, defend each other, and be truly a more perfect union. That word union always sticks out. Now, fast forward and we see where we are today, and we could look at them and say, hey, we could critique our forefathers all we want to. There was not ideal in implementing this idea, but it doesn't diminish the idea within itself. The ideals that in order to make a better union of people together, we needed to have a common goal. And that leads us to, let's talk about what it really means to be diverse. This is a topic that in the tech industry, we've been dealing with for well over a decade. In society, we've been dealing with it forever. But specifically, I'm going to talk about the tech world because we made a big statement about this 7-8 years ago and said that it's a problem. We need to fix it. And we had company after company roll out and make all these grand statements of what they would do to increase diversity. But I think one thing that was missed is we never really thought about this question. What does it actually mean to be diverse? So we're going to do a little bit of experiment. Right now, so what I want you to do is take about 10 or 15 seconds. I want you to close your eyes and I want you to think about the last Zoom meeting you were on, the last meeting that you were in, or the team that you work with. I want you to picture and see all of their faces. And then ask yourself this question, actually 2 questions. Number 1, do they all look like me? And number 2, is this the image that comes to mind when I think about diversity? Now, whatever those images were and whatever you came to, I want you to hold that for just a second. We're going to park that, but we're going to come back to it. When we talk about being diverse, it's more than just a collection of different colored faces or different backgrounds. It's a very deep topic. It goes into anything. People that think differently than you, that approach problems differently than you. And it's important that we have this because it allows us to create systems that encompass everybody. We're hearing everybody's thoughts, we're hearing everybody's opinions, and we can build a system that can cater to that. When we don't do that, we kind of start building things for one collection of people. And that makes it really hard to then break through and be a diverse company. So when I started just now, I talked about how, 7 or 8 years ago, a bunch of big tech companies came out and said, hey, we're gonna fix this. We're gonna fight against diversity. Let's look and see how that's going. Apple back in 2014 released some workforce data. So if we look on the left, we see globally across their workforce gender, 70% male, 30% female. If we look at race and ethnicity, we saw 64% white, 21% Asian, 3% Black, 6% Hispanic, Latina. And so this just kind of pointed out the glaring problem that we already knew. Tech is a predominantly male, white generated field. Okay, they all came out, the Facebooks, the Apples of the world, and said, we're going to fix this, we're going to do better. Let's look at that. Fast forward 20 years, or fast forward 6 years to 2020. 66% male, 34% female. That's a 4% increase on the female representation side. Here's a hint, that's not a lot, right? When we look at race and ethnicity, the representation for Black African Americans went up 1%, 1 in 6 years, 2% for Hispanic Latinas. So what we're seeing here is that we didn't see a lot of growth for all the blustering that we talked about, for all the statements that they made. It really didn't show up in the numbers. Let's keep going. Let's look at Facebook. Maybe somebody else did better. Facebook released their results, 2014 to 2020. Look at that line. It's not moving. It's not moving very much at all. In fact, the more interesting one is on the right side for technical growth, which is the purple line, a 0.7% in additional groups outside of Asian in representation, 0.7. This is in 6 years. Now, while I will give them credit, and probably one of the biggest spikes in the data that I looked at was on their non-technical, it went from 2 to 8.9%. Hey, that's a whopping 6%. I want you to imagine this, right? For these public companies, if you're used to reporting numbers, imagine if you told your shareholders, hey, we grew revenue a whopping 6% this quarter, or we grew revenues a whopping 6% in 6 years. These companies would not exist. These numbers are abysmal and they're a joke. And we have to do better. Let's look at Google. Overall, we see the same thing. The numbers really aren't moving. We're seeing slow percentages, point percentages, 1%, 2%. At this point, the point is kind of made. The other interesting fact is I was looking at each and every one of these companies' diversity reports, and I looked at other ones, but I wanted to highlight these, was that every single beginning to the report literally began the same way. Hey, here's our numbers. They're not great. We need to do better. Year 2, hey, here's our numbers. They're not great. We need to do better. Year 3, hey, here's our numbers. They're not great. We need to do better. At some point, we have to stop saying we're going to do better, and we just flat out have to do better. And we get better by doing one thing. We have to be accountable. The reason why I think this is very important for us in the identity sector is because we've had this phrase for the last couple of years that identity is at the center. What does that mean? That means we should be right at the center of helping our organizations create career paths and result in increasing representation in our field. And I think it's doubly important for us in the identity field because we are starting to see identity systems used more and more in technology and more in everyday use to things that we used to see in sci-fi movies, right? Think about what we've done in the past decade with the phone. How do you log into your iPhone now? You look at it and it opens. That's identity. It's authenticating you based on what? Based on your face, maybe biometric information. We're starting to build more and more ways at how we authenticate somebody, identify somebody into these systems. But if we're looking at the people that are creating these technologies and they don't have diverse workforces, who are we leaving out? And even more scary, what systems are we building that might continue to build biases that we know we already have? So if we're truly going to be at the center, we have to be at the center in all ways, not just from a tech perspective, and making sure that we're getting the underrepresented groups involved at the center of making these decisions or building these systems that we're building for everybody. It's the only way that we can really move forward. So going back to the technology side of it, we're seeing things versus AI algorithms, facial recognition, even things from open banking, digital healthcare. We're looking to open up more and more systems, and we're leaning on identity at the center to help authenticate and secure this data that we're giving access to. It's even to the point where we're using facial recognition to determine whether or not you're a criminal or not. Now, I know what you're thinking when you hear that. No, Dave, you're going too far. That's like Minority Report. We're not there yet. That's still too sci-fi. Really? I want to introduce you to somebody. The gentleman that you see here is Najir Parks. Now, you see two pictures here, one on the left, one on the right. Now, at first glance, you might look at this and say, okay, that's the same person. It's not. Najir Parks is the one on the right. My right, anyway. The one with the lighter side of it to it. The one on the left is an assailant who committed a crime. Then Najir Parks, through the facial recognition, there was a false positive that led him to getting arrested. So imagine this story. You're going to Western Union, you're sending some money to your fiance, your family members, whoever, money in your life. You've had some troubles in the past, had some convictions, but you straightened up your life. It's been well over 5 years since you've had your last conviction. You now have a steady job as a carpenter. You're enjoying your life. You're getting ready to get married. Life is great. As you leave Western Union, take a picture of your receipt just so you can have some tracking info so you can send your fiance and let her know that, hey, the money's on its way. You get a frantic phone call from your grandmother. She says, hey, the police were just here 2 days ago asking questions about you, saying that you committed a crime. You think to yourself, there's no way that's me. Like, what are you talking about? I haven't done anything. I've got a steady job as a carpenter. That's not my life anymore. So you go home and you say, all right, let me go to the police station the next day and bring my identification. This has to be a mistake. I'll just go and clear this up. You walk in the police station, you leave going to jail. This is Najir Park's story. Because of facial recognition, there was a gentleman that looked somewhat similar to him that had committed a crime, went through the system, they ran the facial recognition, they got a false positive on Najir. When Najir went in to prove that it wasn't him, brought all his identification, he was arrested because a judge and a prosecutor had already signed off based on the facial recognition that this indeed was him. Najir was placed in jail for 11 days. When he finally was released, he was able to clear his name, but he's been working for over a year to get all charges dropped because it's a crime that he did not commit. All because of a false positive on facial recognition. Now, ask anybody that loves to take selfies. When you got a lot of melanin in your skin, a little bit darker, lighting is very important. And it's also very important when running facial recognition systems and understanding the differences in data. NIST recently did some research on these facial recognition systems and the algorithms behind them. Now, how they work, and I'm going to give you a real quick high-level intro into facial recognition 101. Algorithms have two tasks. The first task is they need to confirm a photo matches a different photo of the same person in a database. So think of this as when you're looking in your phone, it's like, okay, this photo is me. Go find all the other photos that are me, and know that I am the same person. The other one is it needs to, and that's called one-to-one. The next one is one-to-many, where I need to look at a photo and then amongst all a bunch of other different photos that aren't me, I need to point me out and say, okay, that's this person. That's the second task that this algorithm has to do. It's called one-to-many. So one-to-one, match a picture of one person to another picture that's them. One-to-many, match a picture of one person against a database or another group of a bunch of different pictures that's not them and find them out of the group. Call one-to-many, where's Waldo? Well, here's some interesting information from NIST. Among US developed algorithms there were similar high rates of false positives in one-to-one matching for Asians, African Americans, and Native groups. For one-to-many matching, the team saw higher rates of false positive for African American females. And then for one-to-one matching, the team saw higher rates of false positives for Asians and African Americans faces relative to images of Caucasians. The research is clear. When it comes to using facial recognition with minority, we're getting higher false positives. That is not a good thing. False positive leads to a bad day in the case of Najir Parks, and really a bad year, where you're falsely accused of something you didn't do. Now, NIST in their research didn't go into the details of exactly why this was creating false positives, but we can make a conjecture that when you're building these systems, the team that's building these algorithms, the test data that they're using. Are they using more pictures and training the algorithms based on other people other than Caucasians? Is the team that's building it looking around and just composed of people that look like them and not knowing that, hey, or not thinking that, hey, we should probably get some more data in here, or not realizing how much lighting really matters in a picture? Because depending on your background and your experience with pictures, you may not know anything in lighting because you're like, it doesn't matter which light I'm in. If I don't have really dark skin, it doesn't matter. When you have darker skin, trust me, you know about lights all the time. Anytime there's a picture taken, you are very aware of lighting because it matters. This is just one example of how we need to make sure that we're creating diversity into these algorithms, creating diversity into these teams that are building it, because the end products are affecting lives. So let's talk about some things that we can do. One, we can ensure we're building systems for everyone. We can ensure we're creating development paths for everyone to get into this path of identity. And third, and finally, we can speak up, ensure that we're speaking up for everyone. Not just the people that are the most loud. It's not just the people that are disadvantaged, but everybody. We need to make sure that everybody has an equal voice. Here's another example. This was on Twitter. There's a lady that posted a screenshot. She was applying for car insurance. And this is the thing that she got when she put in her last name. Now we look at this and it's like, okay, it's not as severe as something that happened to Najir Parks, but still in the same, we're basically saying that her last name is not valid. How do we get to this point? Well, we didn't really build an inclusive team. We're not testing beyond just the simple functionality of an app to see how does it really use in real world. We're not thinking outside of our own unconscious bias. We're not being conscious of those biases. Some of us don't realize that we have them. And look, bias happens with everybody. That's why it's called unconscious. And they're not malicious things. It's just how we are. There's just certain biases you're going to have. I'll give you a perfect example. In coming up with the slides for this talk, I submitted it to get reviewed. Andy Hindle, who is the all-knowing, all-everything for Identiverse, and always does such a great job of putting this on and working with us presenters, reviewed it and said, hey, David, I love the slides. I love the talk that you're giving. I wanted to point something out that you may have missed or maybe didn't think of. So at the beginning, we started with that preamble, and it was for the Constitution of the United States, right? And so I thought that that was perfect, and it gave me the lead in and all the story that I wanted to tell. But from Andy's perspective, he said, yeah, but it gives it a very American view of this. And this is a big thing. This is a global thing that we need to look at. And I was like, Andy, you're absolutely right. And it's not that I didn't think it was a global thing, but I'm American. So my bias was to look at it from a very American point of view. And there's just a real world example of how having diverse thought, diverse backgrounds can allow you to collaborate and work on something and build something that's better. Now, you guys will be the judge of whether or not it made this talk and this presentation any better. I personally think it does. And so I thank Andy for that. But that's, again, it's just another example of why we need to focus on building inclusive teams. And when we look at the teams, when you look around at your team, if everybody thinks like you, if everybody has the same background, if everybody looks like you, there's something wrong with that team. You need to start making sure that, hey, what are we doing to make sure that we're adding a little bit of flavor into this team? We're adding some diversity. We're adding some different thoughts, some different backgrounds, some different perspectives on how we build this. Next up is making sure that we're creating development paths. So the quote on the screen is from a conversation that I had with Ian Glazer, who we all know and love. And it was a couple of years ago at Identiverse, back when we could be around people and hug people without, going into an anxiety attack about it. And Ian and I were talking, I was asking him about his motivations for ID Pro. And ID Pro is a professional organization for helping identity professionals. If you haven't heard about it, check it out. I'm pretty sure there's going to be different talks here. So check those out if you can, unless they're the same time as my talk. And don't check them out at all. You can watch them on demand. But I was talking to Ian about ID Pro, and he said this quote of we built this really great treehouse, but he was worried that we're pulling the ladder up after us. Meaning, have we come together and taken all this knowledge and then ran away with our ball and went home? What are we doing for the generation that's behind us, for the younger engineers that are coming up, the younger identity practitioners that are going to build these systems that to levels that we never thought of? Are we making sure that we're creating a path for them? We're giving them knowledge. And I thought that was really cool and important. So I'm excited to see everything that ID Pro has done, and we need to do more of that. And we can do that by creating more professional organizations, having local meetups, sharing the knowledge that we have gained with identity, and making sure that we're doing it to people that necessarily maybe didn't want to think that identity was a career path for them. And really, I want to focus on internships and really apprenticeships, right? We got to make sure that we're developing paths for young identity practitioners to get into the field, to understand it, to get these junior level jobs, and really to find jobs in general, because as those of us who've been here for a while, 15, 20 plus years, you got into identity because you got stuck with it. You had to implement some vendor product and then go figure it out. Well, we're past that. So let's make sure we're making better pathways for individuals to get in. Finally, the last thing we do is speak up, right? We are all chief diversity officers. This is not a job that one person can fix. You don't hire one executive and everything changes. We've seen that with the data that over the last 6 years, that doesn't work. We all have to be responsible for this. We all have to get comfortable having very uncomfortable conversations. This last year alone forced the world to confront with a very real issue that we have in our society. And we had to start having these conversations. We need to continue to have these conversations. We need to take back and go to our organizations and figure out what we can do to make sure we're being more diverse. We can't just say, oh, HR's got it or the chief diversity officer's got it, because they don't. It's a bigger problem they can solve. They need everybody. They need all of us to chip in. We can no longer be silent, because in the end, we will remember not just the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And that silence speaks so loud. There's a great quote by MLK. Let's no longer be silent about this. Let's have the conversations. Let's be bold and talk about the things we can do to make our organizations better. So I'm going to wrap up here and I'm going to leave you guys with this. There's two things that I want to do. Number one, I want everybody to make this promise. So I want you to go back to in the beginning. I told you to envision your last meeting or your team. Close your eyes and see them, see the faces. Think about how that team interacts. And if you came to that and says, wow, that's not really what I think of when I think of diverse, then I want you to make this promise that from today going forward, you're going to work with your organization to figure out how you can become more diverse. Send an email to your chief diversity officer if you have one. Contact HR, ask about an employee resource group. If none of that exists at your company, be the person that steps out and says, well, we're going to make sure this happens. Because representation matters. We've seen that in the last year more so than anything else. And for those of you that have been around for a while, you've got some gray in the beard, gray in the hair. We've seen all of it, right? And we've lived in this industry and got into a point where we've created influence. We're speaking on stages. We're now at senior level positions. I'm really leaning on you to make better strides at your organization. Make a path. Use all the influence that we've gained to make it better for the next generation behind us. Because if we can stand on stage and take all these accolades, so we can go back to our organizations and say, hey, we need to make an internship program. We need to make a way to make these teams more diverse, and we can use our influence to make that happen. We can no longer be silent. We can't just put our head in the sand. We can't just look by and watch it go. We have to be the ones to step out and do that. So I'm asking all of you to kind of make that promise today that that's what we're going to do. And if you're watching this and you say, but I don't even know where to start, send me a message. Let's talk about it. We don't always have to have the right answers. We just got to be willing to take action. So I'm going to end with this. I took that preamble and I kind of changed it a little bit. And I said, we the people of the Identiverse, that's us, all of us in the identity field, in order to form a more perfect union, establish fairness, ensure global tranquility, provide for the common defense, and promote the general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty to our digital selves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this promise to all, that going forward, we're going to make a more perfect union. We're going to be the chief diversity officers. We're going to have the uncomfortable conversations. We're going to look at this problem and go, we can solve it. Enough is enough. We're going to do better. We do that by just taking one simple action, one conversation at a time. Thanks for taking the time and listening. Look, I hope you enjoy the rest of Identiverse. If you want to talk more, you know where to find me. If you got questions, drop them down. Let's talk about it. We'll see you guys soon.